For all those who appreciate the work that we're doing here on Standing for Truth, please hit that subscribe button because we are just getting started.
Well, let's look at some of the evidence around this. So if you look at the ice layers in the Arctic, you can take the Volstork ice core samples. There are 680,000 layers on the Arctic, and that's caused by snow piling on top. You've got these snow ice layers, and there's ancient atmosphere trapped within these layers that you can test. But for 680,000 layers to build up, if the Earth was only 6,000 years old, that would mean that we would have to have 170 winter-summer cycles every single year, and I really don't see 170 winter-summer cycles every year. It would be theoretically impossible for us to gain that much snow
It's an
ice.
extreme change.
That quickly. It has to be way older than that for that amount of snow ice to build up. I mean, I have never seen 170 winter-summer cycles in 1 year. I mean, maybe I just haven't seen that.
Sure. Well, let's take this one slice at a time. In 1942, some airplanes took off from America to go fight the war. They're called the Lost Squadron. They hit a storm over England, couldn't land, turned around, tried to get back, ran out of gas, and landed on Greenland. Everybody survived, but the airplanes were stuck there, and so they just abandoned them and went on and fought the war. 1990, a guy from Middleborough, Kentucky, at the airport there decided, hey, he was a millionaire. Let's go get those airplanes off the ice. He sent a crew over there. They spent 5 years. They had to tunnel down with they called it a gopher, 4-foot diameter coil of hot water pipe that they melted a hole down to find the airplanes because it snows a lot there. Mm-hmm. And I talked to the guy, Bob Cardin is his name. His phone number's on my videotape number 1. If you watch the Age of the Earth video number 1, and you can call him up and talk to him. He's the guy who melted the hole down to get to the airplane. They took it apart, brought the pieces up, took it back to Kentucky and put it together, and it flies today in air shows. It's called the Lost Glacier Girl. When they melted down, they had to go through 263 feet of ice to get to this airplane that has been sitting there for 48 years. They know
But these are snow ice layers. Like these are actually layers of ice. These aren't just feet. These are actually like full like layers. Feet of. They don't count the amount of ice like that. There's a certain amount of feet per layer, and it goes down that way, so it's not really per foot.
I understand extremely well the situation. What happens is, under extreme pressure, ice will compact, and then it squeezes out the air bubbles, and it becomes what's called glacial firn, F-I-R-N. When that happens, it flows like plastic. Hence, you get glacial movements at the lower levels against the base. They move different speeds than the upper levels and all that. This is the kind of stuff you study in basic earth science. Okay, so I talked to Bob. I said, Bob, when you melted down to get to the airplane, did you go through layers of ice? He said, oh, they're very distinct layers because when the snow is simply pressed and packed, it makes a milky colored layer. When the snow has melted and refrozen, it makes a clear layer. So similar to tree rings, it's white, clear, white, clear, white, clear. I said, how many of those rings were on top of those airplanes? He said, oh, many hundreds. I said, how could there be hundreds of layers? They're telling me in school these are annual layers, summer, winter, which is what you brought up, the summer-winter cycle, which is simply not true. It's not summer, winter. It's warm, cold cycles. And yes, you can get 100 of those.
But warm, cold cycles are around they happen annually. They don't happen. I mean, when the sun is not facing that side of the earth, that's when it's cold. If the sun's facing it, that's when it's not cold. So, I mean, it still happens annually, regardless of if it's a warm, cold, or winter, summer, whatever you want to call it. We named cold winter and warm summer. We could flip it around. The names mean nothing. Warm, cold cycles still happen annually. I mean, you do not have 170 cold cycles every single year. And it doesn't get it when the sun is facing the Arctic, it does not get cold enough to build up these layers quickly enough in that amount of time.
I hope you go back and re-listen to what you just said and think about it twice or 3 times maybe. If we can't, you can get a warm cycle and a cold cycle and a warm cycle and a cold cycle in 1 day.
Yeah, you can no, but I'm telling you, it can't happen. You're not going to get a layer that quickly. Like these snow ice layers require lots of because it would just thaw before the snow compacted.
In a very short amount of time.
Well, let me explain the basic physics behind this. The surface can melt, which is what always happens. You guys are in Kansas and Nevada, for heaven's sake. You know about this. You get a thick layer of snow on the ground. When it gets warm, the top begins to melt first. Then if it refreezes that night, you get a crust on top, and the snow is still underneath.
I'm telling you, all the snow did melt.
Yes, but that's, I mean, that would imply that there would have to be feet of snow multiple hours a day. Like it would have to be cold and snow like 4 feet, and then it would have to be warm the next hour and melt the ice on the top, and then it would have to be cold and snow another 4 feet. I just don't see that happening frequently enough from any evidence that I've seen. I've been looking into it while you've been talking. I don't see any evidence of daily warm cold cycles that are causing feet of ice layers to be added.
Well, if you watch my videotape number 1, I deal with this in great detail about the age of the Earth, and the ice rings are not annual layers. They are simply, they represent hot, cold, hot, cold, hot, cold. And you could get several of those in one day. And when they drill down to get to the airplanes, which they knew landed 48 years earlier, there were hundreds of layers, distinct layers on top of them. So it did.
So, but not hundreds of thousands, though. Hundreds, right? We're talking 680,000 layers.
Well, first of all, they've never counted 680,000 layers.
They've done the ice core samples.
They have not. I was in the freezer in Denver where they did this. Just north of Denver, they have the freezer where they store the ice cores. They took me in there, let me see them. As you get deeper and deeper, it becomes less distinct. They're squeezed and pressed, and all kinds of things happen. They do not count 680,000 layers. But
well, I don't think they counted it.
Whoever told you that lied to you. Okay, they lied to you. Get your money back.
One thing you said was that the moon receding a few inches a year, less than 1 million years ago, the moon would have been so close it would have drowned everybody. So you said the Earth couldn't be that old because of the receding moon. When I saw that in the seminar, I looked it up and I did some research on it. But even if the moon was receding at 6 inches per year, if you go back, for example, 6 million years ago, that would only be 95 miles. And when you have a moon 240,000 miles away, I wouldn't agree with the claim that it would drown the entire world, because the grand scheme of things, it's not. 6 inches is extremely conservative, I would say.
I know you've made the argument that the speed of light has not remained a constant in order to refute the light argument to be used for how long the planet has been here. So couldn't we make the same argument about the rate at which that the moon was receding?
Well, assuming gravity remains constant, which I don't think anybody's arguing about that, gravity of the attraction of masses. As the moon is closer, if we can imagine ourselves winding the clock backwards, bringing the moon closer, you have another phenomena that enters in called the inverse square law. As you've decreased the distance, the amount of gravitational attraction increases exponentially, or actually logarithmically. So it's a more complex problem than people realize. And you can do the research on it from the sites I give at the bottom of my slides as I talk on it. The fact is, the moon system is decaying. The moon is leaving. That does put a time limit of some kind, and it's less than 4.5 billion years.
Even if you go back only 6 million years, though, that's only about 95 miles compared to 200.
Why are you going back why are you going back 6 million years if you're claiming 4.5 billion years? The lunar orbit collapses. It cannot, like two magnets, you can't keep them apart if you get too close to each other, if they're strong enough. So the moon's orbit would collapse 1.2 billion years ago. That's what the research shows. So
okay, here's what you said in the quote. The moon is receding a few inches every year. Less than 1 million years ago, the moon would have been so close the tides would have drowned everyone twice a day. And then you said it was impossible for it to be less than 2 or 3 million years old. But even if I take 6 million, it's not that big of a...
Yeah.
Okay, if indeed I said that, I don't recall that, then that would be incorrect, and I stand corrected. I would say 1 billion years ago, it cannot. But way before you get down to 1 billion years where it was very close, you're going to have a severe tide problem, including a land tide. You're going to have earthquakes everywhere. We have not only a ocean tide every 6 hours and 25 minutes, we have a land tide. America lifts up an inch or two as the moon goes over it, or as we go under the moon. But we don't feel it because it's all coming up at the same time. So
and also, I know you don't believe this, but kind of like what is being told here is that the moon actually came after a large meteor hit the Earth and it kind of branched off and was trapped in our orbit. So it doesn't mean the moon and the Earth were around at the same time. The moon is younger than the Earth in that regard.
So what you're referring to is what's called the ejection theory, that the moon was
Right.
ejected from the, that has been proven wrong, physically impossible, a century ago.
Why did they find rocks, the same rocks on Earth, on Mars, or on the moon then?
Well, I don't know who's teaching that. Well, the fact that there's same rocks on the Earth and on the moon, which they're not, by the way, the moon has a much higher silica content. But if they were the same, that would prove a same designer, same creator.
Okay, so if you do not have the same rocks, do they have a different designer then?
No, it's not.
Well, look at Jupiter. Jupiter's a gas planet. Does Jupiter have a different designer since it's not the same?
One topic at a time here. The moon is leaving us. It is receding. That's observable. If you run the clock backwards in our imagination, it puts a time limit of some amount. And so far, all the evidence indicates that number is 1.2 to 1.4 billion with a B. Now, way before that 1.4 or 1.2 billion is reached, when it collapses, you're going to have a tide problem. So if you guys need 4.6 billion years for your theory to be true, and you need, X number of billion years for your frog to turn to a prince, like evolution teaches,
I think it's only 3% of Christians believe in creation at this point on Earth. I can look up the exact numbers. I know those are 2012 statistics.
It's higher than the United States.
Yeah, literally 3% around the world believe in creation. So I would argue that you would be saying the majority of Christians don't want to accept Christianity. I think I want to accept the Bible.
Before you slap and run, let's answer the question here. Bring up a topic and let's answer it, and then we go on to the next one. As far as the moon, or as far as the ice rings, I now have my slides in front of me. If you'll look at my seminar part 1, I cover the airplanes. Bob Cardin, who dug the airplane out, his number was, at the time I made the slide, 606-248-1149. He will tell you there are hundreds of layers on top of airplanes that were there for 48 years. They are not annual layers. Stop teaching that, okay?
Okay. You want to talk about like evolution?
From a bigger picture before we move on. You guys, if you want to believe in evolution, which apparently you do, you have to have billions of years. That's if it could be proven by one single proof that the Earth is not billions of years old, the entire evolution theory collapses.
Okay, you were talking about evidence. I just want to know, what type of evidence would it take for you to submit that evolution occurred?
Well, I guess you'd have to define what you mean by evolution. What do you
The theory.
By interspecies evolution.
Oh, no, now you're changing interspecies. You mean cats, coyotes and wolves are related? I've already accepted that.
And any kind of evolution, like literally evolution is a broad theory. The theory of evolution, yes.
The word is way too slippery. I believe dogs, wolves, and coyotes have a common ancestor. I do not believe dogs and bananas have a common ancestor.
But would you submit that they all share common DNA ancestor? I mean, if you compare a dog to a banana, they have a DNA match of some percentage.
Okay, let's assume that dogs and bananas match in their DNA. What would that prove?
That would prove that we have a lifestyle because what DNA does is it changes, it mutates, right? We know this. So when God created humans, right, he created us with DNA. What would be the purpose of creating a DNA-based life that has room for changing, for evolving, if evolution weren't true? Why would he even need to create DNA? If he's so perfect, why would he not just create some sort of life that didn't evolve? Like
or a better form of genetic material.
Yeah. Why would he? Yeah. Clearly, DNA is not superior. I mean, there's some mutations that don't help species. So he could have come up with some different idea. I mean, the fact that he came up with DNA proves, I mean, in my eyes, I think DNA proves evolution because DNA changes and enough changes added up, enough microevolution changes added up will eventually turn into macroevolution.
It's dimes equaling dollars after a while, essentially.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you believe these micro changes we see add up to macro changes, you have great faith, but that is not science. That is, nobody ever observes anything go outside of its kind.
Well, that's because it takes millions of years.